preparing.
Welcome everyone to the City Council's Public Safety Meeting. It is June 1st at 6 p.m. and I'd like to call the Public Safety Meeting to order. Would everyone please stand for the pledge? Councilman Zalewski, can you lead us in the pledge?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will do a roll call. Councilmember Gully, Councilmember Ash McPherson,
Present.
Councilmember Steele,
Present.
Councilmember Zalewski,
I'm here.
and I am present. And we also have present Councilmember Cummings. And I would like to welcome the mayor and the chief. And we are holding this meeting to discuss the ordinance 38, the purchase of the scanners. And I will now open the floor to any questions that we have.
Chair,
Councilmember Ash McPherson.
35 or 38 are we doing? You said
It's-
38.
I think 38 is the radios, 35 is,
All right.
Either way, we're not acting on the legislation today. We're
Right.
just discussing the
Just
text.
to make sure we're discussing the right one. I'd like to start if that's okay.
okay.
Chief, thank you. Can you give us, I know you went into extensive information on this the other night. If you could go over this a little bit more. The questions that I'm getting, that I'm looking for is, a lot of people are concerned that this grant is going to take away them and the ability of listening to the scanners. Is this grant the sole purpose for that reason, or is the sole purpose for this grant is to upgrade the system, and this is going to have the ability to encrypt? If you can explain all that, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks. I think there's a couple questions in there. I think we're conflating two things. So particular to this LETPP grant from New York State Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, the grant is for a number of items to include equipment. Within that equipment, there is a budget line for radio equipment, subscriber equipment, so portables and mobiles that will work on our system. If you're asking if the purpose of this grant is to upgrade the system or to encrypt the system, no, that is not the purpose of the grant. There's other equipment included in the grant that is more IT-based or computer-based, but in regards to the radios, they are subscriber equipment. So portables, hand-carried radios, or a mobile radio in a car, and the various accessories. Those radios will be capable of encryption, but the purpose of the grant is not to make improvements to the system or to encrypt the system with this grant.
Thank you. So therefore, people are still going to have the access to the scanners. A lot of people are very concerned. Like I had sent a different email, growing up, my parents, they all listen to the scanner. I find it a good source of information. It has been helpful to a lot of people in our community that listen to it. They hear something going on, and then makes them on the alert of checking their property, whatever. So that's a big concern that I'm hearing from people, that you're going to encrypt it and cut the scanners right out.
Okay, so that's a separate concern. That's a separate matter. So that's why I think we're conflating the two things. So our radio system, our land mobile radio system, it's actually two systems. There's an old analog system, which is our EDAC system, and there's a new P25 trunked digital system. We have been upgrading and building out the P25 system over the last several years. We're at a point now where we have both the system upgraded and the subscriber equipment, the mobiles, the portables, and they are capable of encryption. One of our purposes and goals through the work on the system is to encrypt. And I listed a number of reasons in prior emails and also in the public discussion. I absolutely understand, and I know people, friends of mine who have, going back to old school scanners with crystals to the newer programmable scanners, and now with the app, you don't even have to be technically savvy to be able to monitor police communication. The upgrade to the system will enable us to encrypt the talk groups, and there's a number of reasons for that. And while I absolutely understand the public has an interest in knowing what's going on, there is a tremendous amount of personally identifiable information, sensitive information, protected health information that in the course of our communication or that we receive through our role as law enforcement, that goes out over the airwaves. And so, as I mentioned before, you used to be able to walk into DMV and give them a license plate number, get all their information. You used to, write your social security number and everything. I think we have to look at this in terms of the radio system is a communications tool for the police. As I said, it's recorded, it's retrievable. So it generates a record. I think it's different in the sense that over the years, people could listen to it. So you could just listen to it like a radio station. But the information that goes out over the air goes out everywhere, within the coverage area of the radio limits. So anyone, whether their intentions are good or bad, for any reason, can receive that information, can record that information, and disseminate that information. And as I said, a lot of personal information goes out. So not only stuff that's protected, that might be like an identity theft situation, but also sensitive information. We use an example, I think Councilmember Zalewski mentioned a suicidal subject, but we could also look at like a domestic incident situation where the nature of our communication is communicating both the location, maybe the names of the people involved, the address, what happened. And while if we generate a record of that, that's not being transmitted to everyone, everywhere. So if we look at the voice transmissions of a radio as the same thing as a file of information, I don't think anybody would be okay with us just posting that every day. And so that's the privacy side, and that's a big side, and we can go more into that. Along with that, we have real-time monitoring of police activities and tactics, locations, deployment, what units are where and throughout the city. And so we may be kidding ourselves if we pretend that criminal offenders don't actively listen to it, or people associated with them don't listen to our radio transmissions and use that to either avoid detection, avoid capture, or to commit crimes, or to gather information about victims or potential victims.
Thank you. And I totally get that. I completely understand that. Do you now, I'm under the assumption now that if there's something that you don't want going over the airwaves, you guys use different channels. Is that true or no?
So on the new system, it's just terminology, but the radio channels aren't really selected because it's a trunk system. So the system selects the channels, but we refer to them as talk groups. So that's the talk path. That's where you're assigned. So we do have multiple talk groups. On the old system, the encryption was rather difficult to program. It was also quite costly. Now, newer systems, different manufacturers either include it for free, the encryption for free, or in our case, the vendor, it's a penny per license for each radio. So the cost is minimal. With the new system, we have encrypted talk groups, but during an active call or the dispatcher, it would be completely impractical to switch back and forth. Even if you knew ahead of time your radio transmission was going to be one of those categories, protected information, health information, something sensitive, to be able to switch in the midst of something would be completely impractical.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chairperson?
Councilmember Zaluski.
Kim, were you done? Okay. Chief, I just wanted to maybe just go back a little bit into communications policies. So do we actually have a written policy on Troy PD communications? And for that matter, does Troy FD, does the fire department also have a similar policy?
We do. I can't answer for the fire department. I suspect that they would, but I can't answer for that. But yes, we have a policy. It will be upgraded as we move and we transition to the new system, similar to the draft policy for body-worn cameras. As we learn through the system and through practice what we need to include in the policy, it will be updated.
Okay, where is that policy right now? Is that something that is that public? Is that published on a website? Is it public or is it just internal?
It's internal. It's part of our general orders. I can certainly share it with you if that would be helpful.
Okay. I get, so I just, and I can't take credit for this. I'm sure I'm not alone in receiving questions from the public. So I'm trying to pose some questions that some of these I asked myself and some are certainly, beyond what I was even thinking, and they're good questions. So if you don't mind, I'd just like to, try and ask a few. With respect to the communications policy, do we have a specific policy on clear, unencrypted communications versus encrypted communications? In other words, does the policy cover the two and the cases where each would be used?
The current policy talks about certain talk groups that are encrypted on the old system. We will need to update it as we move forward, transitioning to the new system. So that will be included in there. The plan that we have intended is to move the system-wide encryption, with the exception of the non-law enforcement talk group. We call it citywide, which includes other city departments. So for example, animal control uses that, DPW, DPU, the fire department has access to it. Troy Housing Authority, and that's probably the extent of it.
Okay. And so you anticipate then, as a result of these new systems, and I understand, like Councilperson Ashley McPherson was making the point, and I agree that these new systems were not purchased specifically to suddenly move to encryption. I understand that we were already in the process of doing that already some of our communications are encrypted. Is that correct?
Yes. So some of on the old system, a few talk groups were encrypted. And the new system, it's the old analog system to the transition to the new digital system. So the features are much easier and much more cost effective to transition to encryption, whereas it would be very cumbersome and costly on the old system to transition system-wide to encryption. Right.
But let me make sure I'm very clear on this. Are there communications right now, even though we have not purchased this new equipment, are there encrypted communications right now?
Existing? Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So have we already made changes to our communications policies to address encryption based on the fact that we've already been making this transition, or are you waiting for the new equipment in order to make those changes?
In the sense that we've identified the talk groups that are encrypted on the old system, they're identified in the policy. But beyond that, some of the naming conventions will be different. We'll name the talk groups a little bit differently. But the updated policy will include language about the encryption across all the talk groups.
Okay. And just to be clear, a talk group, is that just a channel? Is it a certain frequency?
It's a bit of just the terminology. So the radio has frequencies and assigned channel pairs. On an old system, for example, on a conventional system like our old UHF system that the police department had, that now the fire department uses that same system, you'd have a pair, and a receive and a transmit channel through the repeater, and you would select that channel, or that's how you'd refer to it. On the trunk systems, because the working channels are selected by the system, we refer to them as talk groups. So we're selecting the talk path as a talk group. But if you're just if you just want to think of it as like a channel on a radio or a channel on a TV, it's similar in that concept, but it's named differently because you're not selecting the channel.
Okay. And you can actually assign names to these talk groups.
Yes.
Can you give an example of, one or two of the talk groups that would be standard?
Sure. There's a number. There's priority, patrol, detail, incident, citywide. I don't know. I could look to the radio. I mean, we
No, that's fine.
have.
I just wanted a couple examples. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Do you record all communications, whether they're using the old system or new, whether it's analog or digital? Is everything recorded?
So on the old analog system, we have it's through our phone recording system. We have recorded channels, as well as Rensselaer County 911 records them. On the digital system, the P25 system, we have recording at the site of the talk groups. And then our expectation is once Rensselaer County 911 has the programmed system and talk groups into their equipment, it's their equipment, they own it, they will also record those talk groups that they have in the dispatch center.
Okay. So today, as things exist right now, you're still using analog communications, right?
We're using both. Yep.
Oh, okay, you have a combination. That's right. On the analog side of things, are all channels recorded? Because you said we do record, but you didn't make it clear if everything's recorded.
Not every talk group is recorded on the analog system. There's a
Okay.
limit within our phone recording system on the number of recording channels in the system. So they're not radio channels, but they call them channels for recording, just like the phone lines in the station. Rensselaer County 911 also records the old system, but there are talk groups on the system that are not recorded.
Okay.
I don't believe citywide, I don't believe is recorded. DPW, DPU, the encrypted talk group on the old system.
Okay, so what determines whether, and let's also talk about the digital system as well. What determines whether talk groups are recorded or not?
With the old system capacity, what we had in place to be able to record. With the new system, we have a logging recorder, which has enough capacity to record any of the talk groups we have on the system.
Even so,
That was part of building up the system, the new system.
okay. So actually, if I understand you correctly, we have better recording capabilities in the new system. I think you're calling it P25. I don't know what P25 is, but that's.
It's a standard. It's a nationwide standard for radio systems, so that different manufacturers' equipment will work. Before, a lot of times you'd see proprietary systems, so different radio manufacturers' equipment would not work with others, and so in terms of like contracting and purchasing, it kind of locked you into a particular vendor. P25 was a standard established years ago. And so when we talk about P25, there's P25 conventional, which could be just radio to radio, could be just a duplex repeater, or in our case, it's a trunk system. So we have multiple repeaters within the system.
Okay. So P25 then is basically a standard to ensure interoperability between multiple communication systems.
Yes. So between systems, but also between different manufacturers' equipment.
Right.
It also includes other standards, not just the radio features, but it includes standards on encryption. It includes standards on interfaces with different systems. You can now, with digital systems, take a system and join it over the internet. You can do it over microwave. You can join systems together. So just like any technology, as you increase the digital capacity, it makes it easier to, it's a matter of programming, honestly, a lot of times, like what it's programmed to do.
Yeah. And you, just to be clear, you have a pretty thorough background in communications. It's what you used to do, right?
That's part of what my other job was, yeah.
Right, yeah. Okay, so with regard to the recording then, and in a digital environment, you're saying that we can record more Are we recording all? And if not all, then what determines that? Is that policy, or is it a limitation of technology? You know, I'm just trying to understand, like, if we're not recording everything, why not?
So moving forward to the new system, as we transition, we will record all the police talk groups. I don't know that we'll record public works, public utilities, citywide. Citywide at the dispatch center may be recorded, you know, through Mercer County 911, but we will have the capacity. We have the capacity in the new system. We have not fully transitioned to it to record all of the police talk groups.
Okay. After recording, of course, recordings are archived. How do we archive them? I guess now I'm also looking for our policy with respect to retention of archives. How do we archive communications? For how long? Who has access to them? Et cetera, et cetera. You know, I'm some information about archiving.
We do archive them. I can tell you on the old system, we probably have several years worth of recordings. It goes back several years. That's probably beyond the necessary records retention time period. But in our case, as long as there's capacity there, we're going to continue to record and store them there. Access is limited to certain administrators on the old system. Captains and above can review recordings, because if they need to quickly listen to a radio recording, we can do that here internally versus waiting for example, the 911 center to make us a copy. On the new system right now, we only have 2 administrators. That will obviously be expanded once we do the training, probably at least down to the captain's level.
Okay. I think I'm going to yield the floor only because I think I have other questions I can ask, but I'm sure we have other people that want to speak. So
Sure.
Chief, who can get the archived calls? Can the public or media?
There are records, so through the FOIL process, and then certainly in our case through court order or discovery, they're available.
Okay. Councilmember Cummings, do you have questions? Councilmember
he looks frozen in time to me.
He's frozen.
Or he's
Yeah.
pondering deeply right now.
Councilmember Ash McPherson, go ahead.
Chief, is there other communities, municipalities using this encryption? Using this type of system that we're looking to go to?
P25 system, yeah, that's the standard most people are transitioning to. Some have encrypted talk groups already. Some are going to encryption. There are different levels of encryption. So, for example, other counties might have a level of encryption on their various talk groups. I think it's something that we've realized it's a gap in our protecting people's privacy, and also the ease at which people who have criminal intent or just bad intentions can access the information. So I think it's a trend you'll see. I know Councilman Zalewski found a good article. I think it was from California. I believe I could have the state wrong. Similar discussions. One of the things that contained was mentioning that the media wasn't included. We're deliberately working to include the media in ours so that the media continues to have that real-time access to the transmissions. We think that's important for the public.
That was going to be my next question. How are we going to get the information out to the media so the public is aware of what's going on?
So we looked at a number of options. One included an app-based solution, so that wherever their newsroom is located, they could have like an iPad or an iPhone and be given authorized access to receive the transmissions. From what we found, that might not be a good solution. The next option would be a physical radio. So if a radio is installed, again, at their newsroom, it would be capable of receiving only and programmed to receive all our talk groups. That's probably the likely way we're going to have to go to be able to give them that access.
So before this, if this were to go through, before the switch would happen, you'd have to have all these other components in place?
When you say other components, you mean the media piece or other components as well?
The other media piece, other components as well?
Yep. So there's the media piece that we're still working through. We're reprogramming radios to include not only our own department radios, but radios of our partners. Again, to maintain that interoperability, we have to ensure that they have the same information in their radio that we have in our system, so that they can access our system. We could talk directly if there's a mutual aid incident or some reason that we go to their location and continue to use our radio, or they come into the city of Troy, as has happened for various events. So that's still, that reprogramming is still ongoing and it's taking time.
And just to clarify, this is also going to affect with the fire department as well on this, correct? For the encryption?
That's, again, I'll leave that to the fire department to discuss. I know that they currently use the police department's old UHF system. I think that provides better in-building coverage for their needs, especially when they're on SCBA. But on the new system, so the P25 system, there will be talk groups programmed for fire department use if they choose to move to the system. But in my discussions with Chief McMahon, I don't think there's any near-term plan for them to move onto the 800 system. Again, the digital system is kind of like, if you think about even these Zoom calls or your cell phone, it's digital-based communication. So a lot of times you'll have parts of speech drop out, or background noise can interfere on a digital, in our case, a radio, but on a cell phone or a Zoom connection, you can have that interference. And in a high noise environment, particularly that the fire department operates in, I think, I can't speak for the fire department, but I know in reading and learning about 800 trunk systems that some of that was a concern on the fire side, transitioning to digital. On the UHF, the voice is a little better quality, so that you can make out the transmission, even if a little bit of it is garbled. Whereas the digital system, sometimes pieces will kind of like drop out altogether, so you just miss a word or something.
I know now
that was the original.
Sorry. I know now that when it comes over the way, their ways, that, you either get the police call or you're getting the fire call. And if the police goes away and they're encrypted, are they still going to be able to get the fire call? That's what I'm trying to think. Or is that going to have to change their system?
So I'm suspecting are you talking about a scanner, an actual physical scanner? Are you talking about the okay, scanner. So the physical scanner, most of them now are programmable, and you can include multiple systems, multiple channels, so you can scan across trunk systems, conventional systems, simplex channels. So if that scanner is programmed for a conventional system such as the fire department, it will continue to scan that. It doesn't matter that if another system isn't.
Okay.
And same thing with an app. So the app somewhere, a physical scanner is connected to the internet. So if it's a private person or an organization, they're scanning over the air and then feeding that onto the internet. And obviously that's a much wider distribution. The internet is literally worldwide versus just the radio coverage for the signal in, for example, our system in Troy. It extends beyond the city, obviously geographically, but not too far.
Okay. Thank you. I'll yield.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Sure. Member Cummings?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Can you hear me all right? I'm getting an internet unstable again.
We can hear you.
Okay. First question, what was wrong with the app solution for the media? You mentioned that didn't work out. Can you go into a little more detail into why that wasn't the right solution?
The app that we had looked into, loading the encryption key, was either too difficult or there was a concern that the encryption key could be read out of the app. And so that key is, what controls the security of it. So obviously that would be a flaw in the security of the system.
Okay, that makes sense. Might there be other apps? Is it worth doing? It just seems like buying radios for every newsroom is a big hurdle, but I don't know how much of a hurdle that is. How much does that cost, and is it something we should be looking to budget for?
We would repurpose existing radios that are capable of encryption. So it's not a new expense cost. It's something we already have. We're still continuing to look into an app-based solution because that will give a wider area that they could be in. Because even if they're located not necessarily too far away from the city, but their particular location, if it's in a dead spot or an area of lesser coverage for whether, if they're in a valley or something, most of them seem to be Albany way, so the coverage seems to be okay. But I think one is based in Niskayuna. And,
yeah, that makes sense. I think that would be very helpful, and also helpful to the second question, which is, have you thought any more about policies for, are there certain talk groups or all talk groups that could be available to more independent media groups that might not be the big TV stations and such? Obviously, in the city of Troy right now, we get a lot of news from independent media, and so I wanted to check in on.
no, absolutely, and that's a good thing. But how we define that and how we have control over what radios are out there, because if the radio is unencrypted, whatever's going over the air is going out to anyone and everyone who can receive that signal, whether it's directly on a scanner or through the app. And so it's nearly impossible to be able to, at each transmission, to switch to another talk group that's encrypted. So again, I'd love to figure out that solution. In the article Councilman Zalewski sent out, it included an app that they referenced. It was kind of fire-based, I think, in the article, but maybe since then it's expanded to law enforcement that could kind of like map the call and show some more generalized information about a call. The communication that we have is all throughout each shift. It's almost impossible to separate, hey, this is something that's going to be private or need to be protected versus something that's not. And neither the dispatcher nor the member on the street can make that transition back and forth between talk groups every time they need to make an encrypted message.
Right. So I think if that's the case, that you feel like where you'd like to go is everything being encrypted, I think we just need to make sure that there are a pretty wide group of different types of people that can get access to that through a process. And I think, it have to be a defined process. And, if you need laws on the books that penalize people if they share information that's not public information, we can talk about that kind of thing. But I think it's important to make sure we do have a plan in place as we move towards this, to give access to folks who are, legitimately providing a service to a lot of residents in Troy, especially given that it sounds like it would take quite a bit of resources to staff up to provide those resources ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be good. Let's see, a couple other questions. I guess it would be good if, could you send us a full list of all the talk groups, and then is it always expanding? Do you add more as you go, or is it sort of a set group of talk groups?
It could be expanded based on, if there's a need for additional talk group. There was an expansion from the old system in terms of number of talk groups on the old system to the new system. It's capable of more. And so we've added some, but it's probably not going to change too much on the new system. Maybe we'll add one or two.
Okay.
But
And
it's,
are there
yeah,
any
it's-
talk groups that you wouldn't provide media access to?
yeah, we would limit it primarily to the patrol talk group, so that dispatch talk group. But other units or other operations, we would not share that. No,
Right, like
it doesn't make any sense to. I mean, what's going out is, and even on the patrol talk group, which is our primary dispatch talk group, we're trying to find the balance, and I absolutely understand the public's interest. But the difficulty is operationally or technologically, we cannot separate out what the information that goes out over the air. So even if we say, hey, we have this group of people, they're independent journalists, they're good people who listen to scanners and they're active in the community, that's awesome. But it's no different that we don't want protected private information to go out, period. So you know what I mean? So that this is the challenge for us. And that's why the interim thought was to have the credential media have access to that. Obviously, I think they're going to have controls in place through their corporate structure that they're not going to rebroadcast the information, or they're going to be maybe more up on legally that they should or shouldn't share something. And they're also a known quantity, a known entity. So if there was some recourse that we would have to take, I think we can follow up more easily with them. So that's why we were clear to want to include the media up front, as opposed to maybe some other localities that did not have a mechanism for the public to still be involved in some way.
So several sort of operational talk groups are already encrypted and would not be public in any way besides recorded and available for discovery, basically. That
Correct.
Okay, interesting. Are there policies existing, or is that part of the update to the policies with regard to how and when people can use talk groups that are not public or not?
It's generally by assignment. So within, for example, our SOS, our Special Operations Section, they're assigned a talk group that's encrypted. Our emergency response team, our tactical team, has an assigned talk group. And so when they're doing operations connected to that, they automatically transition to that. One, it's for the security of the transmissions, but also a lot of times the activity that's taking place on different radio talk groups, it can actually become too much at times if everybody's listening to every talk group. So depending on function, we kind of try to limit where people are. Yes, they'll scan multiple talk groups if there's a reason to, but we don't want too many transmissions overwhelming the officer that has to listen to the radio, especially in patrol. It's pretty active to begin with.
Okay. Is there or will there be a policy on using cell phones for communication during patrol or other operations?
Sure, we can include that in our communications policy upgraded. If you're thinking that could be an alternative at times for communication.
I'm thinking right now, I've heard some communication does move to cell phone that maybe should be recorded. And so we're losing recordings that probably should exist somewhere in the system. And so that's, to me, one benefit of moving towards encrypted is that we move those sort of onto the record, but still private to the talk group. Does that make sense? Or are there operationally things that need to happen on cell phones? And if so, how does that work from a record standpoint?
There's definitely times where cell phones are a more practical use when there's time and the situation under control, or there's more like dialogue or conversation has to happen, particularly like between detectives or maybe follow-up conversations with evidence technicians. But the calls for service and the response is pretty much all done on the radio. It's not practical to have a phone and dial, and the phone is obviously point to point, whereas the radio, it's a broadcast system. So it's point to multi-point, and that's the benefit of everybody hearing at the same time in terms of, members of the department. So when that radio call goes out, everybody hears it. And when somebody responds, everybody hears the reply. We have department issued cell phones, and obviously they're through a commercial carrier. So in terms of how we would record that, I'm not even sure.
I assume we retain
Sure.
metadata from that at least.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, whatever the
Call logs.
cell phone carrier normally, tower locations and user information on the phone number and who they called and when they called. That's all available through Discovery, just as it ordinarily would be. But in terms of recording the conversation, I don't know that there's capability to do that.
And are there any sort of record retention policies that we should be concerned about with that if folks are moving to cell phones?
I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think they're, and I think this would be best answered by our corporation counsel, but the conversation on the department issued cell phone is not creating a record in the sense of the recording. So we don't have that record, doesn't exist. So we're not creating it. But all that information through the carrier would still be available in terms of, number dialed and what tower it was on, things like that. But I would defer that to the corporation counsel.
So just to loop back for a second, do you think that that one benefit of moving towards encryption is that more communication can happen over the radios rather than shifting to cell phones? Or
Absolutely. I think that would be, there's still going to be, I'm not saying there won't be times for conversations on a cell phone, but there are times where people have time. So it's not like the active call for service, because the last thing we want is for somebody to be trying to dial a phone to share a conversation. But knowing that the system is encrypted, the members would be hopefully more likely to use the system, the radio system, because now they're not worried about that information getting out. So whether it's privacy protected information for the public, or it's tactics or investigative leads that they don't want to discuss on the radio as it exists now.
okay. Let's see. I think you pretty much covered this last time, but I just wanted to be clear. At this point, no fire department communication is planning to be encrypted, and no. I know that's one of the big areas people like to listen to the scanner for, so I just wanted to make that very clear. That is not on the table at this point, although of course it's up to the fire department.
So that's based on my conversations, but again, I don't want to speak or answer for the fire department, but that is my understanding that they're going to continue to operate on the system that they currently have.
Okay. Can you tell us what software providers we use for RMS and CAD systems?
TriTech, which they may have been bought out recently, so I don't know if they kept the same name, but TriTech is the current CAD and RMS. That was a multi-county regional project. We used to have High Tech. Before that, we had other software, but the current one is TriTech, and I'll have to look up and see if they're bought out and if they changed their name, but TriTech is what we refer to it as.
And relatively recent version of it, we're pretty up to date on those systems, or it's an older system? You know, do they keep us up to date automatically?
I would think the versions are fairly current. It's through Rensselaer County 911. This is a topic for another day, I suppose. But the CAD and RMS system was a multi-county project. Now there are some member agencies that are moving away to go to a different platform or software, and so it's be interesting to see how this moves forward. Right now, we don't. The city of Troy, so police and fire, we don't pay separately for CAD. And in our case, we used RMS. I think the fire department has different software for their records management. So I don't know if they're on TriTech, but we currently don't pay for that. There is a thought that at some point the city could incur a cost for both our portion of CAD and RMS. Again, I don't think that's connected in any way to tonight's conversation. We can talk about it more, but we can also follow up on a different day with that. But TriTech is the current vendor.
I guess part of the question there is, should we be looking to invest in something that interfaces with TriTech for public information? Two questions related to
Yeah.
that. One, are we sticking with it for now at least? And two, does it contain, how much information does it contain? Are there calls that aren't on that system at all, or are there things that officers are doing that are not on that system at all, or do folks end up logging whatever they're doing regardless of whether it came in as a call?
Okay, let me try to start the first one. The question of if we're going to stay with it, that's kind of an unknown. Again, it's driven by the county, and as you know, you're well aware, you go through the budget process for the funds for Rensselaer County 911, what we pay for 911 call taking dispatching services. I think it's about $1 million or something like that. So whether we're going to stay with the system, I don't know what the long-term plan is for that. Near term, I'd say we would. It'd be too much to try to transition to something else right now. Calls for service that are generated by a 911 call or a non-emergency line call to the dispatch center would be initiated in CAD. But there are also officer-initiated activities that are generated typically by radio, sometimes by phone, whether it's a station phone or a cell phone, but primarily a radio call to the dispatch center. And so the officer initiated the activity, but they're not generating the initial CAD entry. The dispatcher's still doing that. But there may be other activities, follow-up investigations that tie back to an original call at some point, but they're not entered each time they're like a detective is doing something. It might not necessarily generate a new CAD entry. It's just referring back to that original case number.
Like, for example, like a traffic stop would be, they'd radio it in and it'd be entered at the 911 center.
The beginning cut out, but I think you said traffic stop entered at 911.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's two ways actually. So on a traffic stop, particularly the traffic safety unit, because they're usually doing a lot of traffic stops, they can also generate in CAD a call. So they can make that traffic stop entry on their own. They can run the plate. They can run a driver's license check. They can do that. But most times, particularly in the patrol bureau, they're just calling out over the air, a radio transmission. And the dispatcher would then enter that as a CAD entry for the traffic stop.
Okay, great. So it sounds like most of the things that folks are listening to the scanner for are also on the CAD RMS. And if we found a good system to interface that with a map or a slightly anonymized data, that would provide a lot of that data in close to real time. We are getting some notes about, it sounds like Mark 43 is a CAD RMS system that does have an API. I don't know whether that sounds familiar to you. I don't know if that's the same system or a different system, TriTech. So I guess that's a little more research we need to do. Does Mark 43, do you know that system?
I've never heard of that, no.
Okay. So don't worry about that for now. We'll do more in-depth work on that. But TriTech is a good lead.
Yeah, I think to your point, if most people have an interest in what those active calls for service are, you know what I mean? So they're going to be generated either through a 911 call or an officer initiated radio call. So if we could figure out a way to not have that any detailed personal information, but again, either a pin on a map so it's within a half a block radius or something, or some notification. And I don't know the answer to if that can be pulled out of the existing CAD system or not. I really don't know.
Okay. How can we get more information about how that system stores its data? I mean, we can.
I would start with Rensselaer County Bureau of Public Safety. That's who's in charge of the 911 center. I mean, I can certainly interface and try to arrange for that for you, or if you want to reach out directly to your county contacts, either way. But they're the system administrators for that system.
Great. I will pass it along for now, and then let you know if I have more questions.
Chair,
Councilmember Hale.
thank you. Thanks again, Chief, for answering our questions and being so open about it all. Can you share with us within the department, do you have a work group or some folks who are pretty much dedicated to developing the policy along the communication, encryption, the procedures involved? If you could share that with us?
It's definitely by assignment. So our captain of technology and grants, Captain Barker, is instrumental in any technology within the police department. Certainly radios are a big part of that. In terms of policy, we have a policy committee that reviews, updates, and makes changes to policies across the over 100 policies that we have. So they'd be involved in any policy updates. And then obviously different users that have a different role would have input into system upgrades or system use, any changes we need to make. Again, as I said, the old system had a number of talk groups. The new system has some additional talk groups that we found operationally would be needed. We have a primary patrol talk group, and we found over the years, this is not even recent, sadly, I mean, this goes back a number of years, that we can have two simultaneously active calls that we can no longer, we used to be able to just go to priority air. So any unit that wasn't on that main call would go to priority air and they would just stay off the air. We've had it where, for example, at a scene of a shooting, so everybody's tied up at the scene of the shooting, but then another active call will come in. It could be another shooting. And so we can no longer just stay on priority air because units at both scenes, members at both scenes need to be on the air talking. So while we have a primary patrol talk group now that's for patrol to the dispatcher, dispatcher to patrol, we've also added a secondary channel just for patrol and dispatcher so that when that first call is tying up patrol, we can transition to that second one. So that was from user input, but a formalized work group for the radios, no. We obviously interface with our counterparts at other agencies. The New York State Department of Homeland Security has an Office of Interoperable Communications. We work closely with them, not only for applying for grants, but just on procedures and techniques that we learn. A lot of this is driven by FEMA. FEMA has SafeCom, which is their guidance on communications, and there's various training that members have gone to, myself included, but it's a combination. It's not like a formalized work group, but it's a working group of people here for sure.
Thank you. So these recordings that are going to be archived, does your policy address who will have access to that? And does that include steps to restrict any manipulation of that recording? What are the safeguards that the policy includes?
The logging recording system has built-in stamping, if you will. There's like a stamp on it, so that prevents digital manipulation. If we archive something, for example, for discovery or case, we would make a copy at the time that we make the recording and then an additional copy so that the two could be compared later. Restriction or access, restriction would be by authorized user. So whoever we designate to have access to the recordings to be able to, it could be different levels. So it could be review only. So I think the captains and above will have at a minimum review only so they can listen to a call. They can pull it up on the computer. We'll have an admin, probably a secondary admin. In terms of requesting the files or the information, that would fall under FOIL as a record that we produce in the course of our normal business.
I want to circle back a little bit to Councilman Cummings' comments about media. I know you frequently use the word credentialed media, And I just want to stress again that it's very important that we not be in a role where we're censoring in any way. I think we need to make sure that if we're giving it to some media, we give it to all media. And so I really hope that the policy will protect that, the freedoms of the media. I'm also curious what other, I know clearly we're on the encryption route, you indicate that, but have we looked at other possibilities, other options prior to making the decision for encryption?
Well, we could maintain the status quo and not encrypted personally identifiable information, protected health information, sensitive information. But I don't think that's the right way to go. I mean, like I said, if we think about this, so these radio transmissions that are going out about whatever the nature of the call, the people involved in the call, their personal information, if we were at the end of every day to put this list on the website for anybody to see or anybody to retain the information or to retransmit it, I don't think anybody would find that acceptable. So I think we have to look at this in terms of these radio broadcasts are information, and while they're not a physical file per se, it's information that how can we redact or protect certain information that should not be public under any circumstances. There's no practical or other way on the radio system to do that without encrypting it overall. You know, at each transmission or each part of a transmission, we can't actively beep or blur out or whatever it would be, so that information is not going out over the air. So we have considered this. I don't know that there's a workable alternative. Yeah, I don't know what that would be. We have considered it. I don't want to suggest that we haven't tried to figure out ways, but I think the public has a right to protect their privacy. There's other things that we transmit and receive information through law enforcement that is already encrypted or already not visible to the public, certainly not visible real time. And so I think we have to look at the radio transmissions in those terms.
Thank you. While we're on the subject of policies, can you update us on where we are with the body cam policy?
Sure. We have the draft policy. We continue through the rollout of the body worn camera program. They've been in place for a number of weeks now. We continue to learn things about the actual deployment of the cameras, procedures within the system. And so we gave a 90-day evaluation period for the body worn cameras. We're within that. And then at the end of that 90 days, we're going to try to formalize any of the changes we need to make to the original draft policy and formalize that into a completed policy.
And just
That's all
finally,
new to us. Yeah.
And just finally, since you've mentioned FOIL a number of times in the discussion, obviously, we don't seem to have a very good record on fulfilling FOIL, according to some folks. Are there any discussions within the department and with the Corporation Council to move the department forward within the spirit of the executive order and the legislative changes on the state level to make information more readily available to the public and transparent, which is certainly was the goal of that entire reform movement? Have there been discussions to that effect?
So FOIL definitely governs the disclosure and release of records. Corporation Council, the city has a FOIL officer, and then certainly the departments. It seems like the police are the ones that are always singled out, but those decisions are made under the FOIL law. So I think if you in the context of the executive order, if you're referring to 50A or Appeal 50A, there still may be restrictions or exemptions into releasing information. And so we would continue to follow the FOIL policy. In the context of the radio transmissions, if these are recorded files, again, there still may be a legitimate reason to not release the file. When we don't control FOIL, it's just something we operate under. So there's definitely been discussions I think as a council, certainly different committees, certainly between the police department and administration. I can't speak for any other city department in terms of FOIL.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Cummings?
Can the PORB access those records outside of the FOIL process?
That's a good question. Maybe if the mayor wants to weigh in on the language of the PORB legislation, it would seem that they could, but I'll defer to the Corporation Counsel or the mayor.
What records specifically are you referring to, Councilman?
Could they, I don't know if they want to, but if they wanted to, could they say, can we listen to a day's worth of chatter on the recordings from the talk groups?
I can't think of a reason why they couldn't, but I would defer to Corp Counsel. I could ask that question. I can't see a reason why that wouldn't be something that they could do. I'd have to go back and look more closely at the enabling legislation.
Okay. Would you consider either providing the app or a radio to members of the PORB or a member if it's just a radio that maybe needs to be rotated through? Is that something that could provide an additional?
Are you talking about recorded files after the fact, or are you talking about real time listening to the active?
First question was about recorded files. Now I'm asking about real time access. My understanding is the PORB is sort of governed by, they need to keep certain things private if it needs to be kept private. Would that be a potential place to allow for some public review without within the existing structures that would keep it private as needed?
Yeah, that seems like an option to me.
Yeah, I think we could have a discussion around that. I don't know if it's within the enumerated purposes of the PORB. They have 4 or 5. I'd have to go back and look at the language again. Charges, if that's one of them, then certainly that could be made available to them. If it's not one of them, it might be something that you would want to change through legislation, assuming that assuming that we can work out the policies about what their level of responsibility is with respect to listening in. Are they obligated to do that? How many hours? What are they supposed to do with that information, et cetera, et cetera. But we could have that discussion, certainly.
Great. Okay. I guess the other question, I looked up the TriTech. It looks like it sold to a company called Central Square. Does that sound right?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Okay. Seems like it could be worth one of us reaching out to Central Square just to see whether they have an API or any sort of systems that they've built out for other municipalities or areas. Obviously, the county will have to be involved at some point, but I think we should reach out to them.
Yeah.
I wanted to maybe nominate Councilmember Zalewski to do that if you feel like it, but I'm willing to if you don't.
Why would you think that?
Is that a yes, Councilmember Zalewski?
Yes. Aye.
All right, great.
Don't we need a second first? I'll second that.
Chair,
Councilmember Ash McPherson?
Councilman Cummings, are you all set? Chief, I know Councilwoman Steele touched on the body cams, and that was one of my questions. I wanted to go into another area to get an update on the body cams, the policy of where we are at that. How are the officers doing with the men and women that are wearing these? How are they doing with them? Can you answer to that?
Sure. As I said, the whole process and the program was new to us, so there's definitely some changes in understanding the technology, but also the application of technology. We're finding that, and again, I said this initially all along, that I think for the extreme use of force or the false complaints, the camera is going to be helpful on a daily basis. They are creating some extra work demands. There is some classification and categorization of the videos each officer has to make. Sometimes they're able to do that shortly after the call while they're still in zone and on patrol. Other times it's at the end of the shift, and so it's generating some overtime to be able to comply with the calls. It's definitely generating a lot of work for the video clerk. I think overall they're useful. It's still early, and I don't know that we've had any cases where they've the video footage or the video recorded files have gone into a court case yet. So I don't know what that looks like in terms of discovery and testimony on the body cameras. I think overall, people have adjusted to them, and it's a considerable adjustment. But I think the transition has been made. We're still working through it. We'll continue to include things in the draft policy that we're discovering as we go along, and it's been pretty good overall. I mean, it was a big undertaking. I mean, I think it went relatively quick, all things considered. I know some people feel otherwise, that it took a while, but in terms of from when it was funded to when it was rolled out, it's a matter of, I don't know, 6-7 months. So I think that's pretty good overall. I'd be curious if you, as council members, or maybe you've heard comments from the public, if you're hearing on that side, the body cameras, if you've heard anything like that.
I haven't heard anything, and that's why I was asking to get a little update on it. I haven't heard from the public regarding it. I haven't heard anything from the officers regarding it. So I wasn't sure how this was, and I know we just started it. It's only been a few weeks, really. So it really hasn't had much of a information for it, I should say. So that's why I just wanted to get a little update on it. If it's okay with the chair, if I can ask a couple other questions. I wanted to ask, Chief, on the street cams, how are we with those? Where are we with those? I know I've asked you before. I've asked you a few times on them, but I'd just like to get a little update here as far as, are they all up and running? Are we almost there? I know I had some company up here in my district working on some of the cams up in this area. So if you could just give us an update on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. On the city cameras, Eclipse is the vendor. They've been doing a lot of work. I think at this point, they've been to every site, every camera location. Not only have they, checked and adjusted each camera as needed, they've gotten the wireless working where there was existing wireless. So the places where there never was existing wireless, like 126th and 2nd and places like that, they're still standalone recording. They've touched every site, and now they've updated, or they're in the process of updating the servers, transitioning to new servers. Right now, we're actually running both. The cameras are recording to both systems, the old system and the new system, until we can fully transition everything over. The cameras at the park, the new park, I think it was in 7th, are operational. The standalone camera for Glen and 7th is in process. It's in the purchasing process. There's a little bit of a delay with determining power to the site there. Typically, most of our city cameras exist at intersections that have traffic control boxes, so it already has city supplied power. The one for Glen 7th will probably be on a light pole, which I think the city's transitioning to owning the National Grid light pole. I don't know where that project stands. That's probably a good question for the deputy mayor, but in terms of our camera, that project, that's moving forward. That camera can be moved to other locations, that standalone camera, not too readily because it would have to be disconnected from live power, and you need a lift truck. But it could, if things change, it could go to a different location. But the existing cameras are working. We just recently had it was a burglary downtown, the city cameras. We had some decent footage from that. I think we'll be close to closing out the existing cameras and getting them back to where they were. And now I guess the plan the question for the council is, do we plan on expanding this? And if so, we'll certainly present some costs to the council during our budget hearings coming up. Because I have heard that from a lot of community groups and community members about expanding the cameras from what we currently have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the other question I have is, I'm getting a lot of calls, and while I know it's not my area, panhandlers downtown and on Hoosick. And I'm not really sure what can be done about it, or is there something being done about it? I know that some have been aggressive, according to some of the calls that I've received. I don't know if there's anything the mayor or you can touch on with that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've heard some of those same complaints and concerns, particularly in the downtown. I know there's other entrances into the city where people are panhandling. If they're not interfering with traffic, if they're not being aggressive or threatening, they're able to do that. Now, I will say, so there's probably a handful of people that we regularly get the calls on or we interact with. And so our members have reached out to them. They've offered them services. They've offered them, homeless shelter information. They've offered mental health. In particular with the downtown, where we have heard complaints that individuals are being more threatening or more aggressive, there seems to be some mental health concerns. And so we've involved Rensselaer County Mental Health. Commissioner Kathy Coons has been instrumental. We've met already, and we're going to meet again shortly about how to get treatment. One of the things we're finding is that if the individual doesn't accept treatment, it's voluntary, so they can opt out and not continue to get treatment. It's definitely a concern. I mean, we're again trying to balance everything. We're trying to balance everybody's concern for their safety in the downtown, but also if people are just panhandling and they're not aggressive and they're not bothering people, they're not blocking traffic or the sidewalks, we don't want to interfere with that either. So it's a challenge like everything else, but we really have tried for those individuals that may be exhibiting some mental health concerns to try to get them help. And if they don't accept it, they don't accept it. We unfortunately cannot force it.
Okay, I'll just take some notes. I'll come back onto that. And the other question I have is regarding 3rd and Congress. I'm hearing that that's a real issue down there. The store is a real concern down there. There's a video that's going around, and it's not the first one. It was very disturbing. And I don't know if anything is being done with the store in regards to that. I don't know if you can talk about that. But I know that that corner is a very active spot. If you can touch a little
absolutely.
bit on
Yeah, the CBD, the Central Business District, downtown, particularly Congress 3rd, that area, there's a lot of concentration of people, and it seems to be some problems. Again, where people might have mental health issues, we've tried to get mental health professionals in there to offer some outreach. Doesn't seem to be successful. What we're seeing is not necessarily always street level crime, but we're seeing clearly disorder. I mean, I've seen some of those same videos you're probably referring to, and they're disturbing on a lot of levels. Whether some are clearly a crime, but without a victim or a willing or compliant victim or a cooperative victim, I should say, there's little we can do. But in terms of any store down there, so that the store in particular, any store down there, we do partner with Code. We do partner with New York State Tax and Finance. We do try to go through a couple different approaches to getting the stores to do something to deter the loitering and the criminal activity. Unfortunately, we can't always prevent it. It's so difficult staffing wise, I think I talked about this in other matters. I don't want to get too deep into it, but we have a challenge of filling our overtime positions, and we've even got to a point where we're holding people over. And so even the times where we try to post additional details in the south end of the city, north end of the city, downtown, we're not able to fill it. And I think what we're finding is, and I've talked about this, there's a sense of burnout amongst our members from the past year. There's a pile-on effect of every time we're attacked and vilified and made out to be bad guys and girls, and that's weighing on people. So when we ask our members to take proactive measures, it's difficult to convince them why do it, because even if there's an arrest made, the person's usually back out before the officer's done with their paperwork. And so it gets to a point of like, why are we bothering? And obviously not bothered, but we continue because people in the public want to feel safe, whether it's downtown, whether it's North Central, whether it's Lansingburg, whether it's South Troy, Eastside, wherever. And I think a lot of the things, and this has come up in discussions about the reimagine, this has come up in council meetings, it's definitely come up in community group meetings. The police have been tasked to do so many things, and people are burned out. I think a positive of all this discussion is bringing in outside resources like mental health. But again, they're not staffed or resources fully. So where we might call mobile crisis or we might call Rensselaer County Mental Health, they don't have the staff and personnel and coverage to be able to take over some of the things we deal with. So unfortunately, whether it's the gun violence, whether it's the disorder downtown, you're just seeing the effects of, at times it seems like no consequences for bad behavior, and the police are being blamed for a problem that we didn't create and we can't fix.
Right, and I agree with that. And I was looking as far as with the mental health issue, partnering with the county more with the mental health, the crisis unit, to get them on scene more. And I know you guys do call them and whatnot, and I'm hearing that a lot of times it's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours before somebody can get there. I think that's something we got to try to figure out to work on better, because the people that are downtown that are on the streets, they do have issues. They have mental health issues, and there's no place for them to go, and they don't have the resource. And you're right, they don't want to go also. But we also have to see in that video, one of the videos that I saw, that one person was, in my opinion, a harm to himself, but and definitely a harm to someone else for what was happening. So those are things that, and the store itself, nuisance abatement points, there should be, in my opinion, that's something that they should be putting out there and using on these stores that are encouraging these type of behaviors. And I get it. So, but thank you for filling me in on these. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair?
You're welcome. Council Member Cummings?
No, Zaluski.
Oh, sorry, Zaluski.
A lot less hair. I wanted to get back to, the communication systems briefly, and I just wanted to provide some context. Chief, I put some links into the chat, and of course I can group those links together and send them in another email, like I did with the article about Palo Alto, California.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could do that.
Yep. The Mark 43 system that was brought to my attention, actually brought to several council members' attention by Rhea Drysdale. The cool thing about this system is, it does the CAD and RMS, but it's got a developer API. I think Anasha might have mentioned, APIs earlier, which, gets me excited as a developer myself. And the fact that we've got, several universities in Troy, including, of course, RPI, that, we could have student groups basically programming to an API provided by a system such that, we could have new and innovative uses of public safety information. We could have, we could have students and citizens and residents, developing their own apps using our data to make this information more readily available, to allow people to feel safer, to be able to understand, if there's a situation going on. So, not just about having journal, because I know last time we talked about, I think I said there were two classes of individuals, right, that we wanted to take into account when we're looking into these systems. And one would be the, a resident journalist, such as, Sidewinder, someone that's documenting situations, and then volunteer emergency coordinators. And I would put Rhea Drysdale into that category, where she has definitely found herself in a role of she's actually filling in some gaps, I think, that we have in our emergency response. It's not police response, it's not firefighter response, it's coordination of relief services for victims of a tragedy such as a fire. And so I know why why this is very important to her, to have a system that makes this information available. And again, she's one person, but this class of individual, volunteer coordination, I think is important. I posted a link to another article, and this was, again, I don't take credit for it. This was sent to us by another resident, Dan, I think his name is, and that was the how San Francisco solved this problem. And they're basically, if I understand it correctly, they're just using multiple channels. In fact, I'm going to just read from, if it's okay, I'm going to just read from the email that he sent. It says, dispatchers will use certain public channels to send officers to an incident, such as asking units to respond to 123 Main Street for a report of a robbery. Members of the public or the media will be able to hear those transmissions over a police scanner. After units are dispatched, radio communications regarding the incident will be encrypted and the public won't be able to listen. But at the conclusion of the incident, dispatchers will state on an unencrypted channel what the outcome was. For example, officers took a report or made an arrest. So this is something that's in that article about San Francisco. Seems like a simple solution to the problem of making sure that the public, that the media, are aware of what's going on, where we're just, we switch from, public announcement, private communications regarding that, including, specific names of people, medical histories, or whatever might need to be communicated. And then conclusion of the event, we alert the public, this is how it concluded. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously I'll have you read the article, but what are your thoughts on that?
Please, thank you, send that. But so my thought is it's very difficult at the user level. So whether it's the dispatcher, and again, remember in our scenario, our situation, we don't have control of the 911 center. So the dispatchers are not city employees. They're not governed by city policy. I mean, they're county employees. So we would need their cooperation to do that as well. It sounds maybe possible in theory, but I don't know how practical it is. I guess if the dispatcher is doing all that, so there's no need for the individual officers to make that transition each time to whatever talk group, it's maybe a little bit easier. I mean, I'd be happy to look at the article and try to learn more about it. I just don't want to put it on the individuals to remember to turn the radio back and forth. But at the time of the call, if the dispatcher, if we can get the county to agree that the dispatcher will make that change, whether it's encrypted versus unencrypted.
Okay, let me ask. Thank you. Let me ask a related question. So when a 911 call comes in, of course, the initial call. So if I call 911 because there's an emergency in my house or whatever, that's recorded, but that's not public, right? In other words, my call to 911 is not it's not publicly available. In fact, we had a political situation in Troy a few years ago where a 911 call was released, and that was a big deal, right? So the communications between the caller and the 911 center are not considered public communications.
I think they're a public record, and whether there's specific exemptions for 911 calls under FOIL or some other set of laws, but I think it's still a public record. But certainly nobody is hearing that real time. It's not being broadcast over any system. It's not visible anywhere on a website. So it's protected in that way.
Got it. Okay, so let's start with that point. So
Yep.
There's no broadcast of the 911 call. It's basically a private communication. After that, the 911 dispatcher then is going to radio something in. Is that now public?
As it stands now?
Right.
I mean, public in the sense that people can hear that.
Yes. In other words,
information?
Yes, in other words, the 911 dispatcher is going to call on fire services or police services generally, right?
Yes,
At that point, is that being broadcast publicly such that scanners would pick that up?
yes.
And is it intended that that would continue to be the case?
And in terms of the police side, no, because even within that, so again, but that's what we want to get to. How can we get that? I don't want to say generic, but that information out about the nature of a call in a
Right.
general location. Because, for example, if it goes out as a domestic, or goes out as a suicidal subject, or it goes out as, I don't know, some other incident that, while the public has an interest in knowing that something is going on in their neighborhood, do they have a right to know, or should we, as law enforcement who are receiving this information, be putting it out publicly? So we may not say the name, but if you say a particular address and it's in a certain neighborhood, I think the neighbors are going to know who that person is. You know what I mean? So that's why I was hopeful to try to find a technical solution that could kind of like put it in an area. You know what I mean? Like a half block radius or something, without identifying a particular address, because I don't know if it's an apartment complex or something, maybe they can't figure out who it is. But do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I get, I think there's different categories of calls, right? So if there's a call for a fire, generally speaking, I don't think there's a concern for privacy. You want to get emergency services to the location of a fire, and if other people know about it, that's actually for the best, because if a neighbor, let's say I live next door, but I'm at the grocery store and there's a fire, for me to know that before I'm driving home, might be a good thing.
Yeah.
For again, volunteer coordinators being able to show up. That I don't think there's any question that a fire call, having it public, I don't think there's any invasion of privacy there. I can't think of that.
No, I would agree, but just think about if we're just talking about the fire side for a minute, they also do medic calls. So a nature of a medical condition might also go, but I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not.
Yep, but I would consider medical to be another category.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now you have, that's fine. So within police and fire, or let's just take fire out of it for now, but within the police, there's certainly different calls for service. And so now we have to, again, we don't control county policy. So how do we get the dispatcher to follow those categories or whatever levels to be able to say, okay, this call will go out as a public one, this one will not. So it's just a factor to consider. I'm not saying it's not possible. Just
right. Well, yeah, no, I mean, clearly there has to be policy that the county and the city agree on, because there's coordination between the two jurisdictions. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do here. I think we're all talking about crafting a policy that works between the county and the city of Troy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely understand if there was a situation where, like someone suffering from some kind of medical condition, the suicide example that I gave last time, you probably don't want to publicize the name of the person. But if there's a dangerous individual, let's say, let's say that the situation of the suicidal person in the cemetery who had a knife, let's say the person wasn't suicidal, but was just acting erratically and could be a danger to him or herself or others. Other people might want to know that. And if I'm living in the neighborhood where this is happening, it's probably good that we would know that. I don't know. I don't know how you draw the line between, privileged information and information that should be available to others. And I get that it's a complicated topic, but I think we do need to draft a policy that the city agrees to, and that we get the county on board with as well. I don't see any other way around that. I don't know who does that. I mean, I don't think I'm qualified to draft such a policy. I mean, we do draft legislation as legislators, but this seems above my pay grade. I don't know. Mayor, I mean, is this something that, our corporation council would be working on? Is this something that, the Rensselaer County, counsel's office, attorney's office would work on? I think there needs to be something in writing, though.
Well, I think you'd have to give us some clarity. We've been all over the board tonight. But if you gave us some clarity around what you wanted and what you didn't want, we would have to talk with the police and fire services to see how that works in their system. We could take it to the county. The county runs their own show, as you know. And we don't have a whole lot of leverage over them if they don't want to do something. So we could have those conversations with the county and see where we can, where it leads. But no, I guess I wouldn't recommend that the council try to craft this. I think it's going to entail a number of parties in the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a basic principle here that I think we all agree on, that there should be some type of metadata, the kind of the outline of what's going on that would be available. And then there's private communications as the incident's proceeding and names are being used, medical information, and then conclusion, again, some type of public information. I think like that overriding principle of public information, then separate channel of private communication, secure communications, and then concluding public information. If we like start from that principle, and then I know you have to break it down into these categories of calls, because there are certain calls where even on the public side, when you're dispatching it, you'd have to be protective of people's information. But I think that's the starting point, but I would leave that to attorneys and people smarter than me to keep going on it.
Yeah, I think we've well established in this conversation that there is information we would want to have disseminated, and then there's information that I think, out of respect for the individual in distress or crisis, we want to protect their privacy. I don't know that we can sit here tonight or tomorrow or the next day and accurately figure out every case in advance which way that's going to fall. So, I presume the next step would be to have a conversation with county dispatch, see if we can make some discrimination in how this is handled, and start working on principles. Is it going to be perfect right out of the gate? Highly doubted, but it's a start. So why don't we have a conversation with the county, and who knows? They may be wrestling with them themselves. I don't know. To my knowledge, we haven't had a conversation with them about this. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but maybe if we have a conversation with them, it will be a concern that they share. And then obviously we have to get the lawyers involved. Everybody knows that complicates everything.
On the operational side, we've obviously been in communication with the county, and so more from an operational standpoint, but not particularly to the point of would they classify calls and announce them unencrypted versus just transmitting the whole talk group encrypted. But we can bring that up as a discussion.
Sure.
Councilmember Cummings?
Can you give me a list just of the currently unencrypted talk groups, or is that extensive still?
The currently unencrypted on the old system.
Yep. Or whichever.
Priority, yeah. Priority, patrol, detail, incident, citywide, DPW, DPU, Troy Housing, RPI.
Okay.
It's coming to mind. I'll think about it more if I think of another one.
What's on priority and what's on patrol?
Priority is in the hierarchy of the priority for preemption. So when somebody keys up a radio, if somebody's already talking, they can't. If somebody's on a talk group and they key up, they can't talk over somebody who's already on that talk group. So priority is a talk group designated that can preempt all talk groups. So priority, if somebody either presses an emergency button on the radio, that will activate an emergency and automatically key up priority and transmit whatever's coming over the microphone. If a user selects, manually selects the talk group of priority, they will preempt all of their radios across all their talk groups. And so that's like the worst case scenario. If somebody has to get on the air and they need help immediately, they can press the button or they can turn to priority. Other times, if somebody is, right now, we don't have a secondary patrol talk group. So if patrol is busy on a call, sometimes units will switch to priority, but the way it's configured, that's not ideal because the person who keys up on priority then bumps everybody else off patrol. So that's why in the new system, we're going to a primary patrol talk group and then a secondary patrol talk group. And so they'll each be equal in the hierarchy. So if they're talking on one, they can still talk on the other without bumping anybody over to the priority talk group.
Okay. Where are 911 dispatch? Which channel do they, or which talk group do they go out over, or does it vary?
Primarily, they're dispatching over patrol, but they have priority, they have citywide, they have incident, and then then they have other countywide or interop channels down there too.
Okay. Great. Let's see. I forgot whether you said, does the fire department use TriTech as well for stuff that comes out of the county?
So CAD, the computer dispatch, is TriTech. I don't know on the fire side what they use for the records management. I feel like it's a different software. I don't recall the name, but it's more fire service related. But they may in fact use TriTech for RMS. It's worth following up with
Dispatch
them.
all goes through the same place for both, though. Sounds like.
I missed the end of that.
It just sounds like the dispatch at least goes. If we're looking at what data streams we might be looking to get access to for this, it's really just the TriTech.
Yeah, both police and fire through the county through CAD is both TriTech. As far as RMS, I don't know.
Okay. And do you happen to know the system that other municipalities in the area are using for that you mentioned?
For CAD and RMS?
Yeah.
The project was a multi-county regional. So there was Saratoga County, there was Albany County on TriTech, obviously Rensselaer County. And then my understanding is some of the agencies may be moving away from TriTech. So I don't know what the next phase or what the future looks like when you asked if we're going to remain with this. I don't know what the plan is. The counties seem to have the discussion.
Okay. So have other municipalities already moved away to another system, or they're talking about it at this point?
My understanding is it's discussions. I don't know if they have moved away yet. There are definitely other agencies that didn't go to that regional system before, so they may still be standalone on whatever system they were on prior.
Okay. But if there's not a second system that you think there's a 20% chance we'd move to in a couple years at this point that you know of? There's not.
No, I can't possibly.
Others are moving towards.
I can't possibly imagine, because the transition from when we had Albany County and Albany City had high tech, we had Emergitech, and then it took years to transition to TriTech, the current version. I mean, many years, not just like a couple of years. So to transition to an altogether new system, I think you're talking 5-10 years if it happens. It's just a best guess.
Okay. Great. Then we will continue to put our eggs in the TriTech basket. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chief, I have an additional question. In the article that Ken referenced in California, I downloaded the app that was on there. Of course, it's just the fire, and it reports the call, and then it drops a pin on the next screen as to where the call is. So my question is, will the grant, I know funds are specific, will the grant cover the cost of any apps that we may want to try out?
So as written, the budget has detailed what is approved.
Mhm.
We can request through the state to make budget amendments. As long as it stays within that communications line, they may be agreeable to that. I don't know. I don't even know what those apps would cost. I don't think the article, I mentioned the name, but I don't think it had any associated costs with it. So I don't know if it would be within what's currently allocated for the radios. But yeah, we can request a budget amendment. Whether it's approved or not is up to the state.
Okay. Are there any other questions, concerns?
Chair,
Councilmember
do
Zaluski?
you want me to see if I can, I mean, I don't know how to share the image, but it's actually it is really, really cool. This, the Palo Alto app that I don't know if I could just like, I don't know if you can see it if I put it up there. But that's what, that was I think that was the elevator rescue that just came in.
Yeah, that just came in. So it comes in and it shows, I have a pop-up on my screen that shows there's an incident. And then when I open it up, I click on it and it shows the area where the incident is.
Does it give a street address or is it just a general like location? I'm just curious.
No, it gives the address. I think it's at the mall.
Yeah, like here's the elevator rescue one at the top. I think it's got an address. I don't know if that's showing up all right or not, but
Yeah, it has an address on it.
it's probably too.
It was
it's
hard to see
probably-
the screen. But yeah.
Yeah, it's not working. Sorry.
No, but I think that's the idea we want. It's just we still might have to make it a little bit broader in terms of the location, if it's possible. And I don't know how the data, I mean, for example, if a call goes into CAD generates based on the map cross streets. So when you talk about developers and API, I don't know if it could pull that out versus pulling the street address. I don't know, but I think that would be a good balance. You know what I mean? It gets people in the neighborhood, but it doesn't list the house or the, whatever apartment number.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm sorry, Chair.
Councilmember Zaluski.
From what I can see on the Palo Alto app, it gives you an exact address if it's fire alarm, public service. In this case, elevator rescue. It gave you an exact address, but when it's medical emergency, it just gives you the street name and not the exact address. That's really, really interesting. That's got to be intentional.
Well, Ken, I
That's
can
good.
click on it and it will pull it up in Google Maps and it says from my house, it'll take me a day and 18 hours to drive there.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it looks like it's possible real time to categorize these calls quickly and figure out where you can give exact address information versus where you're going to give a street but not the exact address. That's really, really cool, actually.
We're going to do some research based on you're sharing that article with us to see what CAD system they might use, and I'm sure we're not going to be lucky enough that they use TriTech, and so it'd be an easy transition. But yeah, so it sounds like somebody's at least trying to figure out an app or a way to solve this problem. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chair,
Councilmember Ash McPherson.
I'd just like to say thank you to the chief. A lot of information that you gave out. That was more information that, I know I needed so I could make my decision on this, on our council meeting. So I just want to thank you for taking the time and meeting with us and going through this with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Cummings.
Said one last question. I wanted confirmation. the new system that you're buying with the grant, it is capable of, or the new radios and the system that we're already using, it is capable of communicating in an unencrypted way as well, or broadcasting simultaneously to the unencrypted system.
Correct.
Do I need to for certain channels? Okay, great.
I might have answered it early. So yes, the radios are capable of both unencrypted and encrypted.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I'd also like to thank the chief for answering all our questions, and also thank you to the mayor for sitting in on this meeting. And would you, any of you like to speak? Anything else?
No, just thank you for putting this together quickly. We appreciate it.
With that, I'd like a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion.
Second,
Second,
all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.